Dear guests, for this morning's last panel, Brazilian and Danish contributions for multilateral rules on sustainable agricultural goals, we call Jesper Wolf Petersen, Head of Department of EU and International Affairs at Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Fisheries as a keynote speaker.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, I would like to thank the ambassador and our Brazilian colleagues for hosting this event today and for inviting me to speak. As you can hear, there are many different opinions and we might have different starting points, but dialogue is important. One thing that unites people is that we all need access to safe and nutritious food. In order to establish and maintain that access, we also need to protect the surrounding environment and that deliver the necessary services for food production. This balance between agriculture and environment has shaped our food production for centuries. But in recent times, the balance has come under pressure. We are facing climate change and a growing world population. But putting pressure on agriculture and the environment. And we are facing a global biodiversity crisis. Therefore, we need to transform our food systems to become more sustainable and greener. We need to strengthen food security, improve human health, and build resilience to climate shocks and pandemics. And we need to reflect on the true costs of our food systems to build back better and greener within the planetary boundaries. This clearly requires new ways of thinking and new action. But let me share with you some of the things that we have done in Denmark. Less than a month ago, I think October 4th, the Danish government reached a broad political agreement in the Danish parliament on the future green transition of the Danish agricultural sector. This agreement runs until 2030. Some of the main components are binding climate reduction targets of 55 to 65% by 2030 compared to 1990, increased afforestation, reduced methane emissions from livestock through feed additives and manure management, and re-wetting of peatland wetlands. The climate target is binding, which means that it has to be reached one way or another. Many of the initiatives rely on voluntary efforts from the farmers. Restoration and re-wetting of peatlands is one example. But if voluntary efforts are not enough to reach our binding targets, regulation and/or taxation can be put in place to close the gap. The development of the voluntary efforts will be followed closely, and the agreement stipulates big investments in green technology. In 2023 or 2024, the political parties will revisit the agreement and discuss if further actions are necessary. Denmark also recently launched its first ever action plan against deforestation. The vision is that Denmark and Danish stakeholders actively contribute to the protection and restoration of the world's forests. The aim is to import 100% responsible and deforestation-free agricultural commodities no later than 2025. Global forest cover is declining, and urgent action is required in order to halt forest loss and reverse the trend. Approximately 80% of global deforestation is caused by the expansion of land used for agriculture. Global deforestation remains a significant challenge to reach our common goals. Furthermore, forests are central to the livelihoods of many local communities and indigenous people living in and around the forests. And we all share the responsibility for deforestation. Denmark too. Some of the agricultural commodities that Denmark is importing for the production of food and other consumer goods contribute to global deforestation. The University of Copenhagen estimates that emissions associated with the Danish imports of soya and palm oil corresponds to more than 7 million tons of CO2 equivalents annually. They further estimate that the emissions can be more than halved if the imports of these commodities become deforestation-free. The Danish government recognizes its responsibility for the global emissions related to our consumption. With the new National Action Plan on Deforestation, Denmark is initiating a range of initiatives in order to make Danish imports of agricultural commodities responsible and deforestation-free. Initially, the National Action Plan will focus on soya and palm oil. These commodities contribute greatly to the deforestation associated with the Danish imports of agricultural commodities. From 2023, we expect to launch additional initiatives in order to include other agricultural commodities such as coffee, cocoa, rubber and beef. Some of the other initiatives in the action plan includes deforestation-free public procurement at the very latest by 2025, and the promotion of the development of sustainable proteins to reduce import dependency. We also go into dialogue with the financial sector on how to support and to promote responsible and deforestation-free value chains. This is just some of the forthcoming national initiatives. A key element in the action plan is also the very broad approach. The action plan has been prepared through cooperation between ministries in the Danish government and also with trade organizations, companies, civil society organizations have been consulted in the process. We believe that this approach shows that in order to succeed, we need to work closely together. Our efforts also go beyond the national level. At the European level, Denmark is an active part of the Amsterdam Declaration Partnership. The partnership promotes responsible and deforestation-free agricultural supply chains. The partnership launched a new ambition statement in January this year, renewing the commitment to the alliance. The partnership is a great example of good practice, sharing of knowledge and learning from each other. We also follow developments within the EU very closely, and we look forward to the coming proposal by the EU Commission on deforestation and forest degradation in order to reduce the impact of products placed on the European market. This is a very important point for the Danish government, and we have been looking forward to this proposal for quite some years. But of course, clearly this will also deliver on the European Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy in Europe. But of course, we cannot solve all these problems from a national or European perspective. We also need to cooperate at a global level. We do not necessarily believe in one golden tool fixing it all, but believe all stakeholders have a role to play and different tools to be applied. This must happen both at producer and demand side. As with Brazil, Denmark is also actively involved in the Forest, Agriculture and Commodity Trade Dialogue, FACT, which will be launched at COP26 in just a few days' time. Increased dialogue among both producer countries and consumer countries is one of the tools that we need to use in order to stop and reverse deforestation. We look forward to continue in the work in the FACT dialogue, and we hope that Brazil will continue to be a part of the FACT dialogue as well. Action is required, and we count on Brazil to be part of the solution and deliver results. Both our countries are also part of the initiative Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, which will also be launched in Glasgow in the very near future. This initiative seeks to enhance investment in climate-smart agriculture and food system innovation at a global level. Global cooperation on innovation, investments and research is very important in order to reach our goals. And again, we are very pleased that Brazil is a part of the initiative and we look forward to the cooperation. I would also like to mention the UN Food System Summit, where Denmark actively participated in the preparation of the summit in September this year. Our key priorities included food loss and waste, climate-friendly dietary guidelines, antimicrobial resistance, and deforestation-free value chains. On a global level, we also focus on action to prevent hunger, and we support school meals in developing countries. Denmark will continue to engage actively in the follow-up to the summit. To consolidate our commitment, Denmark looks forward to hosting the next World Food Summit in Copenhagen in May this year, where we will focus on the follow-up on the UN Food System Summit, as well as other issues. As you can see, Denmark is actively engaged in the agricultural agenda and the deforestation agenda. We need to act, and we need to act now to stop global deforestation. And as already mentioned, we believe that one of the ways to address this is to cooperate and go into dialogue at the global level. We all share the responsibility here. And thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
And I would like to call now Fernando Zellner, Special Advisor on Sustainability to the Minister of Agriculture, Livestock and Food Supply of Brazil, and Rodrigo Lima, Director of the think tank and consultancy Agroecony, to join our moderator, Mere Vestergaard.
Thank you. You okay there, Mr. Lima?
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Have a seat. I am going to skip the very long presentations because we're a little behind schedule. So I think I'll just, Mr. Zellner, being the career diplomat that we just heard, would you care to make an opening statement for this panel? And I want to, while Mr. Zellner moves to the floor, I want to say this panel picks up where the last one, so to speak, left, focusing on the Brazilian and Danish contributions for multilateral rules on sustainable agriculture goals. And we've already touched on the new due diligence rules and so on and so forth, and I'm sure we'll pick up on that in the coming. Mr. Zellner, please.
Thank you, Mette, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and take part in this important event and have the opportunity to discuss some of the ways that Brazil and Denmark can work together on behalf of a more sustainable agriculture. I just want to acknowledge the comments made by Jasper just now. I see that there's a lot of synergies between what Brazil and Denmark are doing. In terms of the FACT dialogue, Brazil is also participating and is an enthusiast of this initiative, where we can continue to talk about how commodity trade in forest commodities can be made more sustainable. In the Food System Summit, we also privileged initiatives on school meals and on food loss and waste. So you can see that there's a lot of common ground between our countries and a lot of room for additional dialogue. So I focused my presentation on how the Ministry of Agriculture in Brazil is structured to deliver on sustainability. So you're going to hear a lot of the points that were mentioned before by previous speakers, and what you can see is that this is really reflected in the current institutional design of the ministry. So I'm going to take us back to 2019 and the beginning of Minister Teresa Cristina's administration. And the first step that took place was that the Ministry of Agriculture incorporated a number of portfolios from different areas in the executive branch that were spread out between different ministries. So family agriculture, the Brazilian Forest Service, INCRA, which is our institution that deals with land tenure, and fisheries and aquaculture were all in separate organs and were all brought back together into the Ministry of Agriculture. So for the first time in a number of years, the ministry really had control of the entire sector. And what this did is gave us a possibility to have an integrated vision and planning of cross-cutting policies, with a view towards obviously continuing to build a sustainable, efficient, and competitive agriculture going forward. So then we look at some of the strategic planning initiatives that began. We have a 4-year planning cycle in Brazil in the government, which then feeds into longer-term planning. So for the period between 2020 to 2023, these were the challenges that were identified, and I think most of them were covered already. I'm just going to go quickly over. Obviously, research and innovation is the focus of much of our agriculture, since this is the basis for the progress that happened in Brazil over the last half-century. Increasing dissemination of tropical agricultural technologies, as has been mentioned before, is one of our crucial goals in terms of spreading out sustainability to the entire country and to the entire number of producers. Land tenure regularization is a big issue, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in detail in a couple of minutes, and it's deeply linked to the issue of implementation of the Forest Code and environmental compliance. New financial instruments with the idea of bringing more private finance for agriculture. Strengthening family farming and vulnerable groups is also one of our priorities. Developing the bioeconomy, obviously linked to the sustainable development of the Amazon. And opening new markets, as Brazil, much like Denmark, believes in the importance of trade for the promotion of sustainable development and climate action. So I'm just, based on these strategic challenges and priorities, we structured the ministry's actions on sustainability under 3 pillars: land tenure and environmental compliance, innovation and sustainable production, and productive inclusion of family agriculture and vulnerable groups. I'm going to speak a little bit more about each one of these in detail. So first of all, the issue of land tenure. As has been mentioned, this is a crucial point of being able to promote sustainable development in the Amazon. So we have hundreds of thousands of families that migrated to this region over the last number of decades as a result of government projects of development. But these people were never given the land titles to their land. And if you don't have your land title, you don't have access to finance, you don't have access to technical assistance, you don't have access to training, to social policies, social governmental policies, so you're basically existing on the margins of the formal economy. And you don't have access to improving your production methods. So there's a very big importance in regularizing these people, including them in the formal economy, which then links with the idea of implementing the Forest Code. Once you have your land tenure secured, you can be held accountable for environmental compliance within your land. This is one idea one of the reasons why it's important to work on land regularization. And the other issue is this process has to be completed because we're talking about public non-destined lands. And as long as you don't conclude this process, where you regularize people who are actually living on the land and producing, and then give them access to better productive resources, you leave the process open and more occupation can happen. And once more illegal occupation happens, you get increased pressure for more land regularization, and the process doesn't stop. So this is why the legislative proposals that are under discussion and the current laws that exist have dates by which people have to be on the land to be able to have a right to be regularized. And any occupations beyond those dates are considered illegal. But you need to regularize the people that have been occupying the land so that you can stop the process and move forward and start sustainably developing the land. And another point to make that is also important, that I think is not always obvious, is that the average beneficiary of agrarian reform, of land regularization, is a smallholder whose family income is about 180 euros a month and that occupies a land that is smaller than 500 hectares, which is considered in the Amazon a small property. And 89% of these people actually occupy less than 200 hectares. So we're talking about very small properties, people who produce very little. It's almost about subsistence agriculture. So it's about giving citizenship to these people. access to public policies, access to technical assistance, to social support, and so on. And once you have land regularization done, you can work on implementing the forest code. As has been mentioned before, we have a rural environmental registry, which is a database of all the rural properties in the country. This is a self-declaratory process, so every proprietor must go into the system and put in their registry of what's in their rural property. And the government then goes on and checks this to see whether this property is following all the regulations, is compliant with the forest code. And what we did this year was to implement a software process where we can accelerate this verification process, and which is going to make us speed up a process that would otherwise take 10 to 15 years, will be concluded in 1.5 to 2 years. So in the next 1.5 to 2 years, we hope to have most, if not all, of these rural properties validated. And then you can check if a property is environmentally compliant, and if they are not, you can enroll them in an environmental compliance program. So this is why the whole idea of land regularization is deeply tied to fighting deforestation and fighting poverty, obviously, as well. The second pillar is innovation and sustainable production, and here the star is really the ABC program. I'm going to skip over this slide just because we've gone over this already. Secretary Camargo has gone over these numbers. But it's important to say, I just want to mention that for the second cycle of this program, the ambition has been really increased. We have a very strong focus on adaptation because agriculture, as you know, is extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And has a contribution to global food security. So this is what we have to protect as well when we think about agriculture in general. Still in the second pillar, biological inputs is another big priority that we've been working on. As has been mentioned before as well by Secretary Camargo, we currently have 433 products registered and approved for use, but this is the total since 1991. So only in the last 3 years since the beginning of this administration, we've approved another 161 products. So this really shows you the priority that government has been giving to these kinds of inputs. And not only does this promote sustainable development, but it also reduces dependence on chemical inputs, which is what we're trying to achieve. In terms of rural credit, we've been working very hard to develop a green finance market. We've been working with the Climate Bonds Initiative to develop a green bonds market in Brazil. Last year, a law was approved that paves the way for increased private finance for agriculture, which is an extremely important issue in order to increase financing for sustainability. And we're also working on greening our annual agricultural policy. So every year the government releases a policy to support that year's harvest. And beyond the ABC, we're also looking at ways at how other types of financing can also contribute to sustainability. Finally, the third pillar is the pillar of productive inclusion of family agriculture. And here, really, this is about including family agriculture and other vulnerable groups into the formal economy, into the sustainable production by strengthening cooperativism. That's a hard word to pronounce in English. We've also been working on school feeding and public procurement programs, as I mentioned before. Even during the pandemic, these were very important in maintaining the income of family agriculture. Even though schools were closed, the government kept these programs open and working, and they're all based on purchases from family agriculture. And family agriculture also has the lowest interest rates of all of our agricultural policy support. Rural extension, also as has been mentioned before, is extremely important to disseminate sustainable practices to these producers and to enable them to enter the market at a higher step of added value, let's say, and also to contribute to the bioeconomy. We have special bioeconomy programs dedicated to family agriculture, and the idea again is to introduce this sector to global markets and also domestic markets. And then finally, trade. Again, as I mentioned, trade is a vital engine for sustainable development. Brazil believes in open and fair and rules-based agricultural trade. We've been working very hard to open markets in the present administration. So far, we've opened 177 new markets. That includes not only just new countries, but new products as well to countries that were already open, and 68 only in 2021. And we hope to reach 200 by the end of next year. So this is a snapshot of our strategic planning for 2023. This in turn feeds into our planning for 2030, which includes the implementation of our NDCs and the eradication of illegal deforestation, and also feeds into our planning for 2050, when we hope to achieve climate neutrality. So this is how the ministry is organized in a nutshell, and I'm very happy to take comments and questions. Thank you, Matt.
Just, yes, you can applaud that. Just before leaving the floor to Mr. Lima, just one clarifying question, because there's a couple that have asked, why do you want to regularize medium and large properties up to 2,500 hectares if the initiative is aimed at smallholders?
The initiative is aimed at smallholders, but you have to think of this as sort of like a quilt.
Yes.
Right? So the Amazon is made up of different plots of land of different sizes. And if you don't regularize the entire occupation, you leave bits that are open. And again, you're leaving room for additional and new illegal occupation. Mm-hmm. So the ideal thing to do would be to regularize everything in one go and then sort of put a stop to it. But as long as you don't put this definitive stop, you're leaving incentives on the table for illegal occupation.
Mm-hmm. All right, I hope that clarified something for, because there's a couple of you that have asked about this. We'll rush on to Mr. Lima, who is, I still can't pronounce that, Mr. Lima, Agrozone.
Agroecone.
All right, well, it was founded as a think tank, but is now a consultancy, as I think Adriana mentioned, and a leading organization on key agriculture and renewable energy agendas related to both trade, food systems, and sustainable development. I'll leave it to that, and for an opening remark, please, Mr. Lima.
Thank you so much, Meet. Thank you, everyone, especially Ambassador Rodrigo and State Secretary Stim for the invitation to be here. And I think, having heard all of the presentations up to now, I think we have the interdependence and cooperation. For me, it's the intrinsic reasons why we're here together, Danish and Brazil, to discuss how to improve and how to move on. We are about to go to Glasgow, COP26, and climate change is as one of the big issues, but it's not just one. And I will try to bring some views regarding what would be possible multilateral rules to define what is sustainable agriculture. We don't have a treaty creating these rules. We have different places, different treaties and different fora where we discuss what is sustainable agriculture. And just let me learn how to manage this. And I think one of the starting point to try to analyze this is the Sustainable Development Goals. And I take the opportunity to bring some of them, having SDG 2, of course, at the center, because it's agriculture and food and production at the center to be able to feed a growing population. But when we see SDG 2, it's totally connected with at least those SDGs. That is good health and well-being, innovation. Without innovation, we will not be here speaking using this headset and so on. Responsible consumption and production, climate change for sure, partnerships, because without partnerships we would not be here, and no poverty. Without tackling SDG 2, we will not be able to manage this machine and to put this machine working on a good speed towards addressing societal needs that everyone has in different perspectives and different challenges. So I like to consider the SDGs as a basis when we're trying to address and to achieve and to agree on what is sustainable agriculture. And then I'll jump to climate change because we are at the margins of COP26 because of that. And I cannot see agriculture within the whole UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement debate if we don't look to the indices, the nationally determined contributions that parties brought to the table up to now. And we have, from 191 parties that submitted 164 NDCs, we have 142 NDCs, including agriculture. This is basically 90%. So 142 NDCs are saying, I need to tackle agriculture under my climate change plans because several reasons. And those reasons changes from countries to countries. But one of the reasons is common for everyone, that is adaptation. Without improving, without adopting technologies, without being able to manage and to be prepared to tackle climate change, everyone, everywhere can suffer when it comes to agriculture, independently where you are, independently how much technology you have, how much credit you have, how much support from the government you have. So this is a key issue when it comes, and it is, of course, for Brazil as well. Secretary Fernando presented the ABC Plus program. Fernando Zellner also highlighted this. For Brazil, agriculture is part of the solution to climate change, and it's part of our NDC, and it's part of the programs that the government is bringing to COP26. And the ABC plan aims to reduce up to 1.1 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, which is a lot of carbon. And we will agree at COP26 a decision at the Coronivia Joint Work on Agriculture, that is the group that discusses agriculture and climate change and how to move forward with this, which in my perspective is extremely important. And this picture basically resumes the ABC Plus, because basically all the technologies that are on the plan. And if we don't do that in Brazil, and if you don't do part of this in Danish, in whatever country, if countries does not use, adopt, incentivize, and finance technology and innovation, agricultural production will be damaged and impacted and will lose track to the challenges we have to face. So I like this because there's several technologies and we are adopting all of these, and now the plan, the ABC Plus, puts a stronger target to disseminate technology in 72 million hectares in the next 10 years, which is, and we are not doing this because the Paris Agreement. We are doing this because we need to develop agriculture and be able to produce more, to win more profit, and doing it in a friendly manner when it comes to carbon, when it comes to soil recovery. Marcus Young mentioned pasture recovery. We have this 30 million pasture recovery target in the next 10 years in the ABC Plus. This can be considered a problem, or this can be considered a huge opportunity. And for us, it's a huge opportunity because you're taking degraded land into productive land, and also you can restore forest on those land as well. Jesper just mentioned on the keynote about the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate that was launched in the Leaders Summit on Climate in April, but will be formally launched here at COP26. Why? Because at that time, I think 9 countries or something, now there's 21 countries being part of the initiative. Why? Because without innovation, everyone will suffer. And this is not just the big producers that are trying to come up with some smart solution to sell to the world. We have Kenya, we have Denmark, we have Uruguay, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, United States. We have plenty of countries here to work on what? Technology, innovation, technology transfer, finance. Because if we don't do that, we will not achieve SDG 2 as the world. And we are together on this. Remember, interdependence and cooperation. Interdependence. Where to discuss, where to define what is sustainable agriculture. At the UNFCCC, yes, at some extent it is, but agriculture is just this size at the big picture of the UNFCCC. If we don't tackle energy, we will not solve climate change. But it's there also. Biodiversity. We are negotiating the biodiversity framework, COP15 next year in China. We just had the online, the first session of the COP15, discussing the targets and so on. The Kunming Declaration brought to keep the momentum on, and how to define sustainable use of biodiversity when it comes to the different sectors using land and producing, because we cannot just conserve, because we are here, we need food, we need energy, we need several resources, but how to do it more friendly. This is a forum where totally agriculture is there, and how to manage this. And there's no one recipe. There's several different recipes that need to be considered. The Food System Summit, Jasper's mentioned, Fernando mentioned, it's critical. Without transforming, without improving, and we need technology to do that. We need innovation, we need partnerships, we need finance, we need several different elements. We will not feed the world. We have up to 1 billion people starving right now, almost 1 billion people according to FAO. And this is shocking. Regional trade agreements, it's a place where we can try to define what is sustainable agriculture, and regional trade agreements are moving on this direction, and the EU-Mercosur agreement with the trade and sustainable development chapter, it's one place. I'm finishing. WTO, the SDGs, the FAO, and there's plenty other several forums that we can bring to the table to try to discuss this. That's the final one. So when we look to this interdependence and how countries are engaged on these different fora, I come with this question to you. Is there a common multilateral forum to define sustainable agriculture? There is no single approach towards this. Countries' realities, climate conditions, levels of development, technology gaps, how countries can give subsidies or cannot give because doesn't have money to do that, rural assistance, access to credit, partnerships, and other indicators should be considered. There's no single recipe. If there was, it would be amazing, because just follow the recipe. It's not easy to do that. We have the FAO 5 Principles for Sustainable Food and Agriculture and the FAO Climate Smart Principles, the 3 principles. This is a common basis, agreed at the FAO, and technology is there. Partnerships are there, social needs. We have a tremendous opportunity in Brazil to support and to increase sustainable agriculture with smallholders, but they need credit, they need assistance to be able to start producing, doing agroecology, doing differently than they are doing up to now, because now they have support and so on. Parties NDC are the basis to foster improvements over mitigation and adaptation on agriculture. Otherwise, just forget about agriculture at the UNFCCC and let's talk about the other sectors. And this is not feasible. Regional trade agreements can create win-win benefits or can raise barriers, and that's it. I don't buy from you, and I will try to find a place to buy, and that's it. So everything is settled. Not in my perspective. Trade measures should create mutual supportiveness and allow a level playing field for countries to improve sustainable agriculture. Not everyone is playing the game in the same level. And we need to try to at least try to create an equilibrium about that. And to do that, I'll close with innovation, technology transfer and assistance, and finance are critical elements from a multilateral perspective. If we have those elements, we will start to create a balance of this game to be able to collectively collaborate and move towards sustainable development. That is the ultimate goal of the SDGs. Thank you so much.
So just sort of in line or parallel to a parallel line to some of the stuff you were saying at the end, there's a question here I want to start out with. To invest in large-scale food production, which is sustainable, profitable, and contribute to green transactions, is the dream for many investors. However, there are big reputational risks, as we have very clearly discussed over the course of today. How do we mitigate these risks as an investor, and how to approach impact investment possibilities in general in Brazilian agriculture? And this is Anders Fricko from the IFU that is asking this question. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think the starting point is sustainable investments needs to consider key criteria in terms of sustainability. And we have, for instance, at the ABC Plus plan, several technologies that are totally connected to mitigation and adaptation. So if you want to finance integration of crop livestock project, for instance, or including restoration of forests, including the installation of solar panels to produce and to reduce the energy emissions of that specific project, it's a green project. It can be financed, right? But then there's all the concerns, and I agree with the concern from coming from abroad to Brazil about deforestation. Then we have the forest code. Of course, that a project like this would use the forest code compliance process to prove that those area it's already complying with the forest code, or it's in the process of compliance if there's something to be restored and is not illegally deforesting. If the investor says, I want zero deforestation, no matter if it's legal or illegal, they will agree on how to get to this agreement. If like a cooperative, for example, accepts, it will be zero and the project will move on, and then the basic is to agree what are the green criteria to be considered and how it will be managed. Of course, there's all the accountability, the transparency, and so on, which I think it's important to highlight from a Brazilian perspective to DANISH and every people from everywhere in the world, is that the image that I see that Brazil has is that agriculture is going very well because deforestation. And this is not true. Deforestation happens, Marcos mentioned the rates of illegal deforestation, the fact that deforestation is basically taking place over public area, the whole issue of public non-designated land, which is a huge problem. Fernando touched upon this. So agriculture is not growing and being profitable because deforestation. So I think all the way back to climate change and now the ABC Plus and financing sustainable agriculture relies on, of course, you need to have concrete criteria. If an international fund wants to finance a project, of course they will bring their requirements to the table, and they can put zero deforestation requirement. If the project accepts zero illegal, we're not talking about illegal. I'm a lawyer. We're not talking about illegal. So if the investors want zero, they will agree on that with the owner of the land or the cooperative or so on, and they will work towards that. And that's it. And Fernando mentioned the Minister of Agriculture has a project with the Climate Bonds Initiative. CBI created an approach towards green bonds in Brazil on agriculture, considering our reality. And this is something also interesting at the ESG and the whole international finance debate, that you can agree common principles and so on, but you need to look to countries' realities and needs and perspectives to be able to shape the conditions of the investments and so on.
Yes.
So I think it is really tangible to do that, and I think everyone in Brazil is willing to engage into investments, because we cannot rely on public credits solely.
Thank you for that answer. We've been touching a little bit on the green due diligence rules coming from the EU, from the US, from the UK, and I gather that that is something you're going to talk about in Glasgow quite a lot the coming week. What are your main concerns? These rules are coming up now in a month or so.
I would say our main concerns is that these rules actually lead to trade barriers, which would then lead to less sustainability. So first of all, we're concerned with WTO compliance of this kind of rule. I mean, assuming they are WTO compliant, what you're doing is you're punishing producers that are not sustainable. You're closing them. You're closing the doors to them to demanding markets. So you could argue that you're actually pushing them towards less demanding markets, right? A producer who faces a closed, valuable market like the EU market, for example, can either do two things: invest to become more sustainable, which is expensive and takes money, takes training, takes assistance, and so on, legality, or you can move towards unsustainability and continue your action, exploiting and predating as you're doing, and moving to less demanding markets. So that's the concern, and that's why we emphasize collaboration so much, and that's why the fact dialogue, for example, which Jasper mentioned, is such an important initiative, because it brings producers and consumers together to talk about what benefits both sides. So we have to look at the demand side, obviously, but we also have to look at the supply side.
But it sounds to me like, because you come back to the fact that these are poor people and they need an alternative to what they're doing, so on and so forth. It seems like we're grabbing into an entirely different area, which is social policies and reforms and so on and so forth. How far are you with that? Because that seems to be part of the solution.
They're all interlinked. Once you talk about sustainability, you can't unchain social from economic from environmental. So you can't look at these things separately. So you can impose environmental requirements if you want, but if you're not looking at the social and the economic, it's not sustainable, right? If producers aren't making money, you can have the social policies in place, you can have environmental stewardship, but it's not sustainable. So you have to look at these things in an interlinked way, and I think that's one of the challenges that we're facing now, is that you have to look at these things together. You can't just be unidimensional in your demands, not only as a consumer but also as a supplier.
Somebody also wants to know. No, wait. I wanna actually follow up on the due diligence question first. Now, they're coming, these rules are coming, so they're going to be a reality for European corporations, US corporations, UK corporations within very long. What would be the best way to implement that? What would be the best way to handle this in praxis, seen with Brazilian eyes?
I would say in one word, dialogue and cooperation, working together, as some of our partners have been doing with us, as we have been doing as well. So we have to sit together around the table.
But as a corporation, as a European corporation, you are now obliged to understand what goes on in the supply chain, meaning we have to check up on
to what extent did deforestation happen when we import this or that good? How do you think they should handle that?
Well, I think we have to work together. Again, for me, there's only
But what
one
does that
answer.
imply
It's
on a more
collaboration.
concrete
It's
level?
cooperation.
Yeah.
If I may bring some thoughts to this question, there's a lot of projects and studies trying to create a system to monitor products against deforestation everywhere. The Stockholm Institute has one. There's Plant Trace. There's different systems. Okay, there's methodologies, approaches, and so on. And everyone here can create. We can define now 5 new different today here up to the end of the day and start to build it. That's fine. I understand that everyone is concerned. There's reputational risks. There's several different risks. When I look to the, again, I'm an international lawyer. When I look to the EU-Mercosur trade agreement and the trade and sustainable development chapter, and the fact that climate change is there, and the fact that there's the underlying obligation of that chapter is the right to regulate, provided that you comply with your international obligations. So Brazil must comply with its obligations under the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC, for example. For example, there's more obligations. The EU should do this as well, right? So, and this is a process from now to the future, 2021, basically for most of the parties. Some parties consider it's 2020. So we need to do this from here to the future. And if at the the EU-Mercosur agreement, there's a committee to manage and to discuss and to dialogue and to try to find solutions towards common problems that countries has on trade and sustainable development. So, assuming that we have the forest code, you can create whatever mechanism you want to try to trace, to try to bring a deforestation information to your product. Mass balance, you can create whatever system. If you don't use the forest code, you will create a system that considers assumptions. Of course, the assumptions can be very consistent, but are assumptions. If you use the forest code, and the Brazilian agricultural sector has the responsibility to implement the forest code, and there's the process moving on. If we use the forest code, you have, as a company buying the product, you have a perfect, transparent information about what's happening at the origination of the products you're buying. So from a cooperation perspective, how to support the compliance of the forest code when it comes to some specific sectors, if you are demanding this, and you need this as a company, because I understand perfectly. I'm not implying that it's beautiful to deforestate, and so what I'm trying to bring is that if I take the EU-Mercosur agreement and the implementation of the obligations from the moment the agreement is ratified on, and of course we have the Paris Agreement from this year on, and Brazil has this forest code, and we need to implement this. So if this mechanism is official, it's challenging, because imagine we have millions of rural environmental registries to analyze and to manage and to, okay, Brazil is huge. We need to do that. This is mandatory. And we are facing this challenge. But this challenge doesn't happen from one year to the other. So I really tend to believe that companies from abroad should engage with companies, with traders, with sectors, associations. We have associations of producers here to be able to move on this and to get the information they need. It's not that just they want. And ultimately, if the EU solution to due diligence would be, you need to comply with private sustainability standards. This may be an option. May be an option because private sustainability standards, when it comes to commodities, are not that easy to work as it is for coffee, as it is for pulp and paper, as it is for different products.
Right.
And I would rather say if the EU option would be companies, you need to have private sustainability standards, otherwise you have a problem with me because you need to get back to me, and otherwise you will be punished like a fine. It will be a tremendous run for private sustainability standards. What private sustainability standards in the world, not just in Brazil, are being used to commodities? Some of them, but at what scale? So I think would be an easy way for at the EU perspective, as at the regulatory side. But I think it's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be the best option.
You know, I wanted to remind you at some point that we are actually sitting in the very building where barrels and barrels of different whatever stock was sold many years ago. Actually result in a vast deforestation in this country. Almost 65% of this country is agriculture. And somebody is pointing to that on the questions here. So we all have our challenges and things to discuss in terms of finding that balance between feeding people and taking care of the land around us. On that note, you're heading to Glasgow on Sunday. Well, at least you'll be there on Sunday. I want to ask you, an advisor to your agricultural minister, what do you hope to achieve there? I'm aware that it's not the agriculture minister that is at stake there, but you will be there and you will make an effort, you'll make your argument. What do you hope to achieve there?
I think we hope to achieve recognition that agriculture is part of the solution.
Right.
First of all.
Because we have to feed the world.
Exactly, and that agriculture is the only sector that can actually decarbonize, right? Most sectors have to mitigate their emissions, while agriculture can provide positive contribution to decarbonization. So this is one of the things. And then the second thing, as I don't get tired of hammering, is to strengthen collaboration, form partnerships, because we have to work together. You know, it's sometimes tempting to think that we're looking at easy solutions, that sustainability is easy, right? As Rodrigo mentioned. But this is the first time in history that we're asking countries to develop without exploiting their natural resources.
Exactly.
It's never been done before. There is no recipe for it. The only existing recipe for development is burn your fuel, cut down your forests, right? Fish your fish. So we have to think about this differently, and we have to think about it together.
And I have to mention, there are people here who have asked about how if we ate the crops instead of feeding it to animals and all that, and that's a big discussion as well. I just don't think these people are the right ones to ask it to. Just as well as all the questions that could be posed to the lawmakers. I will not ask those questions to these people because they are not the lawmakers, but I will make sure that I pass it on to the ambassador who can pass it on to the lawmakers, because that's the appropriate place to actually direct these questions. And with that...
Can I just add one thing?
You can say something very brief,
if
that's possible, because everybody here smells food.
Yeah. Me too. And I like to eat and to cook. So just to add something to what Fernando mentioned about your question. I remember here in Copenhagen in 2009, COP15, Copenhagen Agreement, parties agreed to create a fund that became the Green Climate Fund and to have $100 billion per year starting last year. And now there's numbers of trillions and so on, depending on what study you read and conversations and meetings. If the Paris Agreement was built on the contributions every country brought to the table, was bottom up. The structure of the Paris Agreement was built from bottom up, not top down. Decide a target, and then we will know how we will decide how to tackle it. Everyone brought directions, and there's the common but differentiated responsibilities principle that connects to finance. So if we don't improve finance, climate finance arriving at agriculture, because there's 142 NDCs saying, I need agriculture, we will lose track as society, not just as one country, as society. We need to improve climate finance.
Well, you know, there is a Danish saying that goes something like, "Without food and beverage, the hero is not gonna succeed, and without finance, nor is he going to succeed." But we will not succeed if we don't get food and beverage now. So I will conclude this panel now, and I will thank you guys. Thank you so much for your willingness to explain this and to open the dialogue, which I hope will continue in the future.
After lunch.
Thank you,
Thank you
and thank you for your
having
questions.
us.
Dear guests, we will break now for lunch.